Sarah had always trusted her husband completely, until the day she accidentally opened his credit card statement instead of her own. What she found there would shatter everything she thought she knew about their 15-year marriage. It was a Tuesday morning in October when the mail arrived, and Sarah was rushing to get their twin daughters ready for school while juggling her laptop and a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She grabbed the stack of envelopes without really looking, tossing them onto the kitchen counter as she helped Emma find her math homework and reminded Lucy to brush her teeth properly. Later that afternoon, after dropping the girls at soccer practice, Sarah finally had a moment to breathe. She poured herself a fresh cup of coffee and settled down to tackle the bills, something she and David had always shared responsibility for during their marriage. But as she opened what she assumed was her statement, her blood ran cold. The header read David Mitchell, her husband's name, not hers. She almost set it aside, but something caught her eye. A charge from the Riverside Grand Hotel in Chicago, dated just 3 weeks ago. $247 for a single night. But David had told her he was staying at the company's usual budget hotel during his quarterly sales conference, the kind of place that charged $80 a night maximum. Sarah's hands trembled as she studied the statement more carefully. There it was again, another charge from the same hotel, this time from 2 months earlier. And another from the month before that, each time coinciding perfectly with one of David's supposed business trips. Her mind raced back to those conversations. David coming home tired, complaining about the uncomfortable beds and terrible room service at his usual hotel. How he'd seemed different lately, more attentive to his appearance, buying new clothes and cologne. She'd chalked it up to a midlife crisis, maybe pressure at work. Never this. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, but Sarah barely noticed. She was too busy remembering other details that suddenly seemed significant. The way David had started taking calls in another room, claiming they were work-related. How he'd begun working late more often, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. The new passwords on his phone and laptop, citing company security requirements. Sarah's sister Emma had warned her months ago. They'd been having lunch when Emma mentioned seeing David at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place they never went to anymore because of the kids' expenses and the mortgage. But he hadn't been alone. Emma had seen him with a woman, someone young and elegant, and they'd looked very comfortable together, laughing and leaning close across the table. Sarah had defended David fiercely that day, insisting Emma was mistaken or that it must have been a client meeting. David worked in pharmaceutical sales, after all, and entertaining clients was part of the job. But now, staring at the hotel charges, Emma's words echoed in her mind like a warning she'd been too naive to heed. The Riverside Grand wasn't just any hotel. Sarah knew it well because she and David had spent their 5th wedding anniversary there, back when they could still afford such luxuries. It was the kind of place with Egyptian cotton sheets, marble bathrooms, and champagne service. The kind of place you took someone special, someone you wanted to impress. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David stating he'd be home late again, another client dinner. But instead of the usual understanding response, Sarah found herself typing something different. She asked which restaurant, said she might surprise him with dessert. The response came back quickly, almost too quickly, with an excuse about the client preferring a private venue. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She called the Riverside Grand Hotel, her heart pounding as she waited for someone to answer. When the front desk picked up, she took a deep breath and asked to be connected to David Mitchell's room, claiming to be his wife with an emergency. The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Then the desk clerk's voice returned, professional but apologetic, explaining that they couldn't give out room numbers, but they could transfer her call. Sarah's world tilted as she realized David was actually there, at that very moment, when he was supposed to be at a business dinner across town. Before she could speak, she heard the phone being answered, but it wasn't David's voice that came through the line. It was a woman's voice, soft and sleepy, saying hello in a way that suggested she'd been woken from peaceful sleep in a bed that wasn't her own. Sarah hung up immediately, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone. The woman had sounded young, maybe mid-20s, with a slight accent Sarah couldn't place. Nothing like the business associate David might have legitimate reasons to be with at nearly 11 o'clock at night. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief, and a strange sense of relief that she finally understood why her husband had seemed like a stranger living in their house. Sarah found herself going through the motions of her normal routine, loading the dishwasher, checking on the girls, setting out clothes for the next day, all while her mind spun with the implications of what she'd discovered. David came home just after midnight, slipping into bed beside her with the practiced quiet of someone who'd done this many times before. He smelled like expensive perfume and wine, not the aftershave Sarah had bought him for their anniversary. When he kissed her forehead gently, she had to bite her lip to keep from confronting him right there in the darkness. The next morning brought a peculiar clarity. Sarah watched David go through his usual routine, making coffee, scanning his phone, kissing her goodbye before heading to what he claimed was an important presentation. But now she noticed things she'd missed before. The way he kept his phone face down on the table. How he'd started taking his laptop bag with him everywhere, even on short errands. The new aftershave that made him smell like someone else entirely. Sarah spent the day researching, something she'd always been good at from her years working as a paralegal before the girls were born. She discovered that David's company had switched to a different hotel chain for business travel 6 months ago, according to their corporate website. The Riverside Grand had never been on their approved list. She also found something else. Social media had always seemed like an invasion of privacy to Sarah, but desperation made her create a fake account to search for clues. It didn't take long to find photos from the Riverside Grand's restaurant, tagged and dated from David's most recent trip. There he was, clearly visible in the background of someone else's anniversary photo, sitting across from a stunning brunette who looked barely older than their teenage babysitter. The woman was everything Sarah wasn't anymore. Young, carefree, wearing the kind of designer dress that cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. She had perfectly styled hair and flawless makeup, the look of someone whose biggest responsibility was choosing which restaurant to try next. But what hurt most wasn't the woman's youth or beauty. It was the expression on David's face as he looked at her. It was the same expression he'd worn when he looked at Sarah 15 years ago, full of possibility and promise and the kind of desperate attraction that makes people do foolish things. Sarah closed her laptop and sat in the silence of her empty house, surrounded by the evidence of the life she and David had built together. Family photos on the mantel, the girls' artwork covering the refrigerator, the mortgage statements and school fundraiser notifications that represented their shared responsibilities and dreams. She realized that the man who'd been living in her house, sleeping in her bed, and helping raise their children had become someone she didn't recognize. The David she'd married would never have been capable of this level of deception. But perhaps that David had disappeared gradually, replaced by someone who could lie with such practiced ease that she'd never suspected a thing. The sound of the school bus pulling up outside snapped Sarah back to reality. She had decisions to make, conversations to have, and a future to figure out. But first, she had 2 little girls who needed their mother to be strong, even when their world was about to change in ways they couldn't yet understand.